Morning.
Good morning, Janice.
How you doing?
Good. How about yourself?
Good. Did you redo all your labels and add craft made sauce?
In my sleep.
I figured. That was a good class yesterday. I enjoyed it.
I did too. I'm learning a lot. I'm really enjoying the class. I'm maybe quiet, but I'll listen.
Okay, well, good. Well, we're all just kind of figuring it out as we go along for the most part. But we shall see. Let's see here. Okay. I'm trying to install something, so I'm looking at the instructions. I'm terrible at this. So let's see. Okay. Here we go.
And that's sweet too.
I'm trying to set up one of those Ring doorbells. Are you familiar with those?
No, I'm not.
They're video doorbells. They connect to your household Wi-Fi, and you can look on an app and see who's at the door, especially if you're traveling, which we do. So I'm going to give it a try. And you can actually, I think you can like yell at the person and say, "Get the hell out of here," if they're a bad guy. I believe, not 100% sure. I guess I'll find out. My biggest problem that I have is all the surfaces that I want to put it to are made out of brick or metal, and this is designed for wood. So I don't know. I don't know how that's going to go. I'm not much for drilling into brick, I can tell you that. So we'll just have to come up with something. I was thinking about taping one of those tripods, those little mini tripods, but then I figured someone would probably steal it if they saw that.
Somebody would politely steal it from you.
Yeah, I think like, what the hell is that? Oh, okay. I'm gonna steal that. Hey Wayne, how are you?
Morning, Wayne.
Hey, good morning.
How's it going?
Good. How about you?
Wayne's eating maple pecans right now, I have a feeling.
Got a bag right there behind me on the counter in the kitchen.
I tell you, I don't think I could have them near me. I would eat the entire inventory, I believe.
Yeah, they are delicious.
Thank you.
And I heard that they're really good for a diet too, which is really surprising.
Yeah, it just depends on what kind of diet you're on.
I'm been accused of being on a seafood diet.
Yeah.
Seafood, eat it. Excuse me just for a second. I'll grab a drink. Oh. Okay, I think, wait just a second longer and we'll get started. Hey, everybody, good morning.
Good morning.
Good morning.
What's for breakfast?
I think maple pecans.
The sound sounded like you were making breakfast, putting plates down on the table and open up a can of something. And
Man, you are like, you remind me of my wife. You know everything. All I did was open a can of Diet Coke and put the glass I'm drinking it out of so I don't look crude and rude to you all. And so that's it. Breakfast of Champions, Diet Coke.
I hear you. Coffee.
Yeah, I'm past that. I go from coffee to Diet Coke. It's pretty bad.
Coffee to black tea. Builder's
Yeah.
tea.
Oh, okay. Well, I did make a change this summer for the first time though, as I switched to cold brewed coffee for the summer. Man, do I like that. That's really good. And I figured out the way you make it, at least with the equipment that we have. You make a double dose or double strength dose of the coffee. And then you basically put ice on it. It's really good. I'm really surprised.
Yeah,
So,
cold coffee's good.
yeah, especially for the summer, this summer anyway.
I drink my cold coffee black.
Yeah, me too.
Whatever's, I don't let coffee go to waste.
Well, I didn't start drinking coffee until I was like 45 years old. I just thought it was gross. And now I'm like totally into it. So, we all live and learn, right?
Yep,
Okay.
absolutely.
All right, we're going to go ahead and get started.
Hey.
I'm going to repeat the last one we saw because I think it's pretty important. This idea of look for what's missing. So we're going to start there. Let's see if I can successfully do this. All right, let's see here. Share sound. Okay. Now, hopefully everyone can see that.
Yep, looks
Yep.
good.
And is it full screen, Con?
Yes, sir.
Oh, wow, amazing. Okay.
So if you want to do this, how do you start to think this way? The idea of looking for what's missing. And that's, if you're looking at a market and it's already there and you're saying, well, that looks like a big market. This whole idea that has been around for a long time of, oh, that's a big opportunity. There's space for, several winners in that particular space. That's just total bull. It's just not, it's not true in digital markets because we go back to in digital markets, winners tend to take all. And so what you want to do is you want to look for a space that's new and that's missing. This is what Airbnb did when they got started. If you think about the story of Airbnb, these two guys in San Francisco had an apartment, a couple of designers, and there was a conference in town that all the hotels were sold out. And they thought, they didn't have much money. They thought, well, hey, we could blow up a couple of air mattresses, put them on the floor, and serve Captain Crunch in the morning, and put this on Craigslist, and maybe we'll get a couple people that would want to, rent this from them. It worked. They quickly realized they thought this, and actually the whole company in the beginning was geared towards the idea of creating space when there were big conferences in town, in any particular town. But they realized that there was this missing thing of how do you have these sort of short-term opportunities to rent a place when hotels don't work and you don't want to have a long-term rental on something like HomeAway. And they constantly saw a bigger and bigger.
I have to tell a story here, just real quick. So the Airbnb guys were running out of money. They did this idea of a mattress on the floor, and it did fairly well. But they didn't make enough money really to pay their rent and stuff. And they were designers. They'd all gone to the Rhode Island School of Design, 4 of them, I guess, and 3 of them ended up forming Airbnb. The 4th guy went back to Rhode Island. But the fundraising technique that they used is they created cereal boxes, one that was oriented toward Republicans and another that was oriented toward Democrats. And they basically put Captain Crunch in the boxes, and they sold the boxes, the 2 different types, Democrat and Republican cereal boxes, as a way to raise money. And they raised about $20,000, which enabled them to keep going and survive. So that's a little different.
Missing as they went, but this was a new space that they created. In fact, at one point, I was at this big business conference and sat next to the CEO of Marriott, and I turned to him and I said, well, you guys must really hate Airbnb, don't you? And he surprised me and he said, no, we don't hate them all. We don't even feel like we compete with them. He said, we hate like Expedia and Travelocity because they take their fees take a portion of our revenue, but these guys, like, we don't care because they see it as a completely different space. Another way to think is to think different, not just better. If you're entering a space, a market space, with the idea of, well, okay, I see that company is doing this already, and we can go in there and just do it a little bit better, that's a way to have to claw for market share, not a way to like really blow it out as a category king. And so thinking about things, you want to be seen as something that's different, not just better. And this has been going on, in history forever in business. And you're laughing. You had one of these? Your family? So this is the Chrysler minivan, right? The little background story on the Chrysler minivan. 1980s. And Chrysler was going bankrupt. This was the time when Japanese cars were on the rise and killing all the U.S. car makers. And Chrysler was suffering the worst. Its back was against the wall. And the leadership at Chrysler, Lee Iacocca was the CEO at the time, was looking at demographic information and realizing that all these baby boomers, the surge in the population, were having all these kids. So there was a big boom in families. And at the time, there were basically 2 choices if you had a bunch of kids. You could either buy a station wagon, which was just kind of a long car and didn't have as much room as maybe you'd need, or you could buy a regular big old van, which didn't fit in your garage because it was too tall. And so they said, well, can we design a car that's built for, families can hold 4 or 5 kids and fit in the garage and appeal to that particular market? And they came up with this thing called the minivan. Importantly, think about category, right? They created a category of minivan, not a product called the minivan. They created a product called the Plymouth Voyager and the Dodge Caravan, but they established in our minds that you have a family, man, you need a minivan. And then if you need a minivan, then the next thought is, well, who makes the minivan, or who invented this thing? Well, it's Plymouth and Dodge, and those are the people to go to. So this thing basically saved Chrysler in the 1980s. And it saved it by thinking differently from anybody else in the car market. And by the way, category king status is a long-term thing, because you think about the whole thing about biases in our brains, you establish that bias and it's hard to take away. And it's, what is it, like 40 years later, and Chrysler still owns 50% of the global minivan market. And this is one of my favorites. This is our takeaway from a couple of our favorite Silicon Valley VCs, who said their favorite kind of market is a $0 billion market. And a $0 billion market is a huge opportunity that only you can see. And you have to, and it takes a whole lot of faith and guts, because you have to be able to believe in it, even if others don't. And you have to be able to go and convince investors and convince customers that that thing actually exists. But if it's a $0 billion market, you don't have anybody else chasing you yet, because you're imagining this thing from the ground up. And so if you're not if you can't look and say, I'm creating a $0 billion market, you're probably on a path you need to think about. Here are a couple of $0 billion markets, by the way. I have a personal story about AWS. I think seem to be constantly circling back to Jeff Bezos, but as a journalist, I had interviewed him many times from the time they were a small company. And I was 2006. I was at a technology conference in San Francisco, wandering around the floor. I get a ring on my cell phone, and it's the PR person from Amazon who says, "Can you come up to suite whatever it was? And Jeff Bezos wants to talk to you." And of course, I said, "Great, I'll be there." And hopped in the elevator, went up, and so I see Bezos, and we sit down, and he says, "I want to tell you about something we're thinking of doing at Amazon." And he describes this whole thing about renting our computing power by the SIP. That was the term he used at the time. And this was a very strange concept. I mean, nobody had done anything like this. And so he's explaining all of this to me, and started stumbling over it for a long time, and he kind of finished, and I looked at him and I said, well, so how are you ever gonna explain this to the public? And he said, "What do you think I called you up here for?" And he seriously was looking for me to write about it in a way that would help him figure out how to talk about it later. But I tell that story in part because he had no idea what AWS was going to become at the time. It was truly a $0 billion market at the time, and he just was throwing it against the wall to try to see if he could create this thing that had never existed before. And similarly, by the way, for this whole 5-hour energy, I mean, it's not just about technology, right? I mean, the guy who started 5-hour energy was wandering around a health food convention. He saw that there were all these energy drinks that were sold, big cans of liquid, and they were being sold in the refrigerator next to Coke and Pepsi and all these other kinds of things. And he goes, well, he's walking around, he's going, well, okay, I'm tired, I need a boost, but I'm not thirsty, I don't want to drink all this stuff. There's got to be a better way. And he created the idea of the energy shot, and in fact, made sure that it was something that was shelf stable so that it didn't have to be sold in a refrigerator next to other drinks. He sold it by the cash register. So it looks like an entirely different category of product. It's not a drink, it's an energy shot. And 5-hour energy now is a $5 billion business. So, $0 billion market, think different, find what's missing.
Okay.
Now, if any of you haven't read this book, one of my favorite books ever about technology, Where Good Ideas Come From by Steven Johnson, who's a guy based here in New York. And Steven, he started with this, and he's a friend of mine, by the way, too, and he started the work on this book just with the idea that if you go back in time, back 100 years, 150 years, before there was a lot of communication around the world, great inventions tended to pop up in different parts of the world where nobody could have possibly known what everybody else was doing. The car was being developed in the US and Europe at the same time. The flight was being developed in the US and Europe at the same time by people who had no idea what the others were doing. Why is that possible? Why did those things pop up at the same time? And he started doing research, and he landed on this idea of the adjacent possible, which looks like this. So if you imagine, this is, on this axis over here is what technology can do. And so, down here is stuff that's proven, the television and radio, or those, obviously those things down here. And somewhere up here is stuff that we think technology can do someday. It's, it's pie in the sky stuff. It's, it's holograms and crazy blockchain ideas or somewhere just a little beyond what technology can do. And along this axis down here is what society adopts and can accept. So, in this part here are things that we readily use in our lives. We got email, we watch TV, all those things. And out here are things that we're not ready for. You can introduce that product, but we're not quite ready for it. And imagine way out here somewhere is like basically science fiction. It's teleportation, it sits out there. So Stephen Johnson's point about the adjacent possible is that all the great world-changing inventions tend to come in this thin line, just outside of what's already, what technology can provably do and what society provably wants to adopt, but not so far out that we don't quite get it yet, or not so far out that the technology is still sketchy. And what happens in this thin band right here is it's usually a combination of a bunch of things that exist already. So it's not, and the minivan is a perfect example of that, right? It wasn't like this radical, like new bubbly invention of a car or a flying car or anything like that would sit way out here somewhere. But it wasn't just, let's take a Volkswagen van and put nicer seats in it. It was something that took a bunch of pieces that were already here and were already in here and just took it outside this line a little bit so that it seemed new and it seemed to solve a problem that didn't exist before, and it seemed to push the technology or the capabilities just a little bit, but not so far out that it seemed crazy. And that's important because, I've seen, through my career, I've seen like probably 1,000 startups. I've sat with them, and I would say half of them are creating something that sits out here somewhere. That you go, and actually one of my co-authors for the book was Al Ramadan, and I first met Al in the 1990s because he started a company called Quokka Sports, and Quokka Sports had this idea of basically putting sports online and creating a new experience by adding a lot of data to what was flowing in, and being able to watch it on the web. Everything about what Quokka Sports was doing was right. 10 years too soon, because we didn't have we still had dial-up modems. There was just and the way that people thought wasn't quite there yet. Like I want to watch this stuff on my laptop, and so Quokka was a breakthrough company. Like NBC and other companies signed contracts with them. They thought it was really cool. But as soon as the tech crash started to happen in the early 2000s, it went out of business because it didn't have the kind of adoption here, and the technology couldn't quite do it yet. And so we see that all of the time. It just sat too far out here somewhere. So the great new categories are, in fact, just a little bit outside of what already exists. So just to walk you through a little bit about on the back end, what category design, what category thinking can actually do for companies. This was a company called Big Panda that's based out of Silicon Valley, and Big Panda was a very deep B2B business. It was basically making dashboards that data centers could use to correlate alerts that were coming in and sort them out. There's a bunch of other companies in the space. They were about 4 years old, venture-backed. And this is what their website looked like, and this is how they described what they do. It automatically correlate your alerts, which didn't separate them from anybody else that was doing the same thing and didn't sound all that exciting. But they had decent business in it, and they had some realization at the company that because we were correlating alerts, we had this enormous amount of data coming through our system. And they started to think, well, if we added we could throw that through some machine learning algorithms to start to understand more about what was going on, and maybe even start to automate the fixes to some degree just without having any humans having to touch it. They had all these big ideas, but they didn't quite know how to describe it, how to put it all together. So we worked with them and pulled it out of them, and they all started to, the concept and the missing spaces started to correlate in their brains, and they ended up coming up with this idea of autonomous digital operations, and a way to establish themselves as something that seemed different in the marketplace. And the analysts start to look at them differently. The marketplace starts to look at them differently. And it's a way to create essentially, at the start, one of the things it creates is at least it creates a conversation. They were able to go in and say, this is what we do. It's different from what everybody else is doing. Let's have a conversation about it and be able to tell you about it. And it's really kind of giving them a whole new direction. Now, Sensity was a company that made LED lights. And they had this insight that Philips and GE and everybody else who's making LED lights had, which is that you've got a light and you can put some circuitry in there and some sensors and get some data and some information out of it, and maybe do things like connect and have a smarter home kind of situation. But they also realized that if you networked a lot of these things together, you could collect an enormous amount of data and analyze it, and the data would actually be more valuable than the lights. And so they came to this concept called light sensory networks, and really sold it more as a data play than a light bulb play. And went to like owners of malls, for instance, and said, if you put all these bulbs in and connect them together, you could collect all this data about like the traffic going in and out, or air quality, anything else you wanted to understand about what was going on around your business. And that put them in a completely different bucket that made them look more like a tech company, a data company, a networking company. And about a year and a half later, what happened was they got bought not by GE or Philips at the valuation of a light bulb maker. They got bought by Verizon at a valuation of a technology company, of a data company, of a machine learning company. So the question is, when in a company's life cycle does it make sense to do this or think this way? And the question is anytime. And I could cite all sorts of examples of any range of time frame. Now, yes, Airbnb, 5-Hour Energy, those were started by seeing a missing space, a category that could be created, and develop the product to that category. Big Panda, company that was 4 years old, already had done essentially what the company was started to do and got to a point of being stuck. Like, where do we take this next? And that's a good time to do it. We just worked with TaskRabbit. I'm sure many of you know TaskRabbit. And TaskRabbit was 10 years old and pretty successful in what it had been doing. But it realized that it had kind of stalled, it had done the same thing for 10 years, and knew that there was something still missing in the market, and a bigger and better way to do what they were doing and make it seem, and feel new again. And so that was, for them, that was a good time to do it. When IBM was 50 years old in 1964, when it introduced the System 360 computer, which was actually probably one of the greatest technology category, it basically created the category of the mainframe in 1964 by introducing this radical line of computers and junking its entire product line that it already had. It was 50 years old at the time. So companies can do this at any time in their history. It's just and some companies are great at doing it over and over again. Some companies do it from the beginning. Could be any time. Yes. But basically the question was, can a startup do this? First of all, a couple answers. Just from our experience, from what we have seen as we've talked to companies over, and about this whole idea of category design, fintech, healthcare, you name an industry that sounds difficult and established, it doesn't matter. There's new spaces and new opportunities in every single industry that's out there. I mean, we've seen it. We've seen companies come to us and have this experience. If you go into any established market and say, we're going to do essentially what they're already doing, but just a little bit better, then yeah, you're fighting the big guys. If you go into an established market with something that feels completely new and different, you're as many of you I'm sure have seen, when you're fighting a big corporation, an established company, they can't move that fast. They can't do these things oftentimes, and so the startups actually take share away from them by by doing the things that they can't do, that they can't figure out and can't manage to pull off right away. And as for a startup versus established company, yes, when an established company sees a new space, they can put all these resources behind it. But it's also really hard for them to do this kind of. Now, Chrysler, the minivan story happened because Chrysler's back was against the wall. They could take a chance on a $0 billion market. Ford and General Motors at the time had all the same demographic data, all the same capabilities, technology capabilities, manufacturing capabilities as Chrysler did at the time. They weren't willing to take a chance on something like that because they weren't desperate. And so what you often see with larger corporations, big companies, is that they're not willing to take those kinds of chances. They're more likely to try to incrementalize and just add, be a little bit better in some particular category that exists. And what we tell companies, and Mike's going to talk a little bit about this later, with something we call suit size. If you create a suit that's way too big for you and it's a brilliant category, what you're doing is you're doing somebody else a favor, because you're not going to be able to pull it off, and somebody else is going to see that and go, Google's going to say, we could do that. And so with this startup, we walk them back, and again, this is coming from them. It's us, helping pull it out of them. We're not telling them this, but walk them back to what can you do that's on the path towards that. Keep that big thing in your pocket for now, but try to establish some new category that takes you on a path to that bigger thing, and know that you're going to take it in steps as you grow and get the capabilities. But yeah, the suit size concept, and Mike will talk about that in this next session, is really important, because you can't, as a startup, do something that's so enormous that it's like trying to take over Google or something. It's not going to happen. So one of the basic principles, it all comes back to the idea that companies that design a category and convince people that that's a category that they establish in people's minds, and you're the king, you're in the best position to dominate it over time. And that's basically the concept of the book Play Bigger, and what we take companies through and try to work with them on. And so that's this first part of the presentation. And thank you very much.
Okay.
So the question is, when in a company's life cycle does it make sense to?
Sorry about that. So I want to show everybody something before we talk about this. Let me see if I can find this. Okay. Okay. I'm going to share the screen again. So many of you are familiar with Keurig, the pods, the coffee pods that they have a special machine, and it makes just one serving at a time. So the argument is, you don't have to make a whole pot of coffee. People can have lots of different capsule, packages, different flavors, and so forth. And one of the problems that came out of that business is a tremendous amount of waste generated by those pods, or whatever they're called, those packages. And the package itself is actually a pretty complex system. It has several layers of material to design to keep the coffee fresh, to keep it dry, etc. And that combination of materials made it impossible to recycle those containers. And the last time I looked at it, the numbers that were going into landfill were simply staggering. And a lot of people were very upset about the idea that this coffee was creating this kind of waste. And the amount of waste, and this is worldwide, is very, very significant. So again, thinking about adjacent to the current technology and trying to solve a problem that a lot of people have. This company has come out with coffee balls. And it's a coffee that is in a little round ball. And you can see it here. They also have a special machine like Keurig that you have to have in order to make this coffee. These coffee balls are all coffee. They're fully compostable, etc. It's got like a hard shell around the coffee underneath. Got a lot of ins and outs, and I'll just show you. See if there's any more pictures of it. I thought there was, but there's not. So let me just look real quick, see if there is a better article. Let's see. This one here is definitely decent. Sorry about that. Oh, there we go. So you can see this person is dropping the coffee ball into the machine. It's kind of, single serve. They've made the machine. There's the packaging. Coffee Bee, they're calling it. There's a little bit better picture of the machine. So, it's in keeping with what we've been talking about, right? It's adjacent technology. It's better, arguably. I don't know how it tastes. I'm not a fan of Keurig myself, just from a taste perspective. I haven't found it to, basically I drink coffee's too strong. Keurig's not enough coffee, I guess. But to me, it tastes like dishwater. It's just very, very thin. But this is an example of category design, really. And I could argue, you could argue that, these guys are playing in the category of single serve with Keurig. Nespresso is another company that makes kind of a special packaging. Or I would argue that they've created a whole new category, and that is a compostable, recyclable single serve coffee. There's no one else in that space that I'm aware of. So that you could argue they've created a whole new category. Or you can say that they're competing in a category and they're competing to be the category king. From a business model perspective, just kind of looking at that, one thing I think is really interesting is they have they've made this machine to go with the coffee also. So, arguably coffee is somewhat of a commodity, not necessarily the highest margin product that's ever been invented. So they've created this concept, and then they've included a hardware. So it's really a system, includes hardware and software, if you will, coffee balls as software. And it really is amazing because if you want these coffee balls, you've got to buy that machine. And I have no idea how much the machine costs. My guess is it's going to be relatively affordable, since everyone has to buy one, at least those who really care about the recyclability and the compostability of coffee. So I wanted to share that with you all. I thought it was a perfectly good example of what we were talking about. So I just kind of open up the floor to you guys, to talk about this category design, this idea of something that's just adjacent to what's technically possible today. And in the case of something like food related products, it could be some unique combination of flavors or types of products that could be put together to create something new, a new category. I'm not sure, something like peanut butter jelly comes to mind, but, just something different that you might not normally think of. Maybe it's, cheese and pretzels, or I guess everyone does that. I don't know. I'm obviously not qualified to be the thinker in this, but you get the point. Anybody want to comment on that whole idea? Bob, I'm going to call on you because you asked me about coffee, so I'm going to call on you.
Well, I don't like the fact that you have to buy the machine and use the balls. You know,
Okay.
it's at least with Keurig, there's until somebody else makes other balls, to me, that's useless.
Okay.
From an avid coffee drinker that grew up drinking Cuban coffee in the streets of Miami, you know,
I knew there was something wrong with you, Bob. Now I know why. Okay, got it.
I mean, I'm 65 and I've been drinking coffee since I was 8 or 10 years old. You know, it's, you know, and Keurig, you know, has different brands, you know, as far as like bold and dark roasted or light roasted, you know, these balls. I mean, yeah, I'm all for composting and I go to Starbucks and get grounds to feed my garden and stuff. But that's to me is, you know, to buy the machine. And then I can only, that's like buying a Chevy and you can only use this car. Remember back in the Flex, when they first came out with Flex, only certain gas stations had that gas that you could only use for certain cars.
Yeah.
It's like,
Okay.
I don't-
Well, that's good. I think that, you know, I get your point. What I was looking for also though was this idea of how your business could use category design to come up with unique positioning or something different that sets you apart from your competitors. I get the discussion on the coffee, but that was really just meant to illustrate, you know,
Okay, well,
somebody take an example of a category design. That's all the purpose of that was.
to always use grade A ingredients. You know, we're a baker and we're gonna start getting into doing our own vanilla,
Cool.
you know, so and different liquors provide different tastes. You know, we have a pretty good following because we take pride in what we make and we use, you know, grade A product, you know, as far as strawberries, blueberries, blackberries, you know, we try to stick to a couple of different things, not 101 things, because then you lose your composure over 101 things.
Okay.
Unless you've got somebody to say, here, do this, and this is the way I want it done, and then that's it. You know, I don't know.
Okay.
So
I appreciate it, Bob.
it's kind of
My wife's gonna chime in here.
Great.
for gluten-free baked goods, especially, we're trying to take the farm to fork concept and take it further. You know, you see this with, I don't mean to call it regular food, but normal everyday, those that aren't celiac, those that don't have gluten intolerance, we see this all the time, but we don't see it in this gluten-free community. And they've been craving this, they just can't get it. So that's where we're going right now. And it seems to have really increased our following a lot.
Well, I think that really illustrates, thank you for sharing that. It really illustrates the point of what the guy was saying in the talk about, you know, finding your own niche or your own category.
Yep.
Don't go to one that has a bunch of people in it. So what you all are telling me here is that you've identified needs in your community or in your market that are not being met, and you're coming up with solutions. And arguably, if you can establish yourself as, you know, the player in that space, then that would be an example of a category king, somebody who sets the terms, if you will, of a new offering like you're doing. So I think that's great. I appreciate you sharing that.
Yep.
Michelle, you commented on here about extracts. You want to talk about how this category design might be helpful to you in your business?
Well, my business is I have a propane fill station, so it really doesn't apply to me.
Okay.
But I started making my own extracts 2 years ago, and I will not go back. So that's a great idea as a bakery, making your own, because you can control what you have when you make your own. It's just it takes a long process because the longer you age it, the better they taste.
Gotcha.
Right, exactly. You know, and we're finding this more and more. I mean, we have certain things that we use. For example, our yogurts. You know, we get on this train of we love this product, it's great. And all of a sudden, especially now in this day and age, we've got problems with shipments, deliveries, you know, the distribution. It's kind of like, you know what, we're better off making our own. It's a little bit more time consuming, but at least we know we have a stable product.
Yeah.
I can't keep switching out different brands because it works differently. Every single one we try, we've got to make some kind of change to the recipe, and that gives us no structure. So that's one of the reasons why we ended up going to just doing our own.
Fantastic. Anyone else want to jump in here on this conversation? Okay. Well, I think that, you know, this idea of category design, the more you think about it, the more you look at it, you know, I think the more it'll inspire you. You know, look for what's missing, which is often the advice just given to startups in general. You know, just find out what's missing and make a product or service that addresses that. So this is not terribly unlike that. It's just a little more granular. It's a little bit more, you know, specific. Finding a category is usually within a product set that we're all familiar with. It's not something that's no one heard of before. This idea of creating something that's so far off the chart that no one even understands what you're talking about, you know, it's a tough way to go, even if it's a fantastic idea. The example he gave in the talk was a sports channel that was 10 years too early. It was a great idea, but he went out of business because it was too early for what they were trying to do. So I think if you can balance that, that blue sky with some practical application of solving problems in your market and the market niche that you're identifying, I think category design can be a real helpful construct for thinking about this. So I'm going to leave you all with that. Is there anything else anyone wants to chat about? Okay, well, thank you for tuning in. Tomorrow we're going to talk more about actual applications of category design, so you'll get some good insights into that. So I look forward to seeing everyone tomorrow. And the other thing I did want to say, if any of you are interested in participating in the October 4th live streaming event, you need to go on Pop Shop Live and apply to be a seller if you're not already. So it's just a matter of downloading the app and then applying to be a seller. And let me know that you've applied so that we can kind of put all that together. We're going to have a live streaming event on October 4th with the Got to Be NC program. They are spending a lot of money actually promoting this. So I think there's a chance there'll be a pretty good audience. So if any of you are thinking about that, I highly recommend it. We are going to have sessions in the evenings or late afternoons of how to do this, like what's the steps to do it, what equipment to get, all that kind of stuff. But I want to encourage everybody who might be thinking about that to jump on that, because I think it would be helpful to your business. All right, well, thank you all, everybody, and we'll see you tomorrow. Okay.